Welcome back to the Southern Pacific Produce Row Subdivision layout. This is the first update video, episode number 2. Since we talked last in the introduction, I've been primarily been working on the end cap section. This is the end cap section that sits underneath the O gauge layout and represents the southern portion of East Portland. So I started here, a couple of things I've changed since I talked about in the update video. I originally was thinking of having multiple spur tracks here. We have the main line and we have our lumber track spur here. I was going to have a spur here for the Ford building that comes off the parallel module that sits right here. But except by looking at this, between the main line and spur here, the SP&S track here, the industry spur here, industry spur in the main line, and this other spur here. Too many spurs, not enough space. It's one thing with even though when you're trying to model with real elements, when you get the track down, you find out there just isn't enough space, especially with buildings. Same thing, just not enough space to jigger, and especially I'm looking at again a footprint that's only half the size of the original layout. So it does take a number of compromises. That was the first kind of loss here, but I'll talk about Bldg later. I'll show the other scene and what this allows some extra help here by removing this spur here. I get some more room here for maneuverability for trucks and vehicles. That I decided to do is I lengthened this track a bit more to accommodate a larger car. So this would actually work as a combination, not just for the lumber yard, but also work track for the Portland General Electric pole yard, which was technically stored underneath the viaduct here. So we'll be able to get a larger flat cars for poles and wire and things like that. So we're going to use this for sort of one industry. We're going to use it for two. The second kind of loss in here, I originally had the East Portland warehouse. Remember, I showed a picture of it. Was sitting back in here, but after I got the embankment here, cut down, pushed back, and placed where it was supposed to go, I found out there's not enough room here for that structure to go. Whether I use the old flat or construct a new building, so that's just not going to go there. So what I'll do is we'll end up feathering this embankment out a bit more to accommodate scenery, probably some fence and some scenery here to make that look a little better. However, what I did do is I was able to repurpose this flat. I did remember that from my research that the Northwestern Ice and Cold Storage building, the original building, was brick and it had pairs of arched windows, similar to this, not exact, but similar. So I took the old building, broke the old side and the roof off, repainted it, fixed it up again, and added the signboard on top, and then that allowed me to use the old structure, and then I married it up with the flat that I had before of the Northwestern Ice and Cold Storage, the more modern 1950s style cold warehouse. Glued them together, and this will allow me to create three car spots of the actual buildings. This is actually, ironically, we get to the end here, we actually got something closer to the actual prototype than even if I had on the previous larger layout. And this thing sticks out beyond the module because it's going to sit on the other module too. Because I want to create that kind of tunnel valley effect between buildings on both sides, which is what the real prototype had. The other thing I did here, if you remember, I couldn't decide what building to use here, the end of the spur, and multiple choices. So I decided to just rely on a building that I had already. This was the Fairbanks Morse warehouse. And most people know Fairbanks Morse for their locomotives and a post-piston, engines for naval applications. But Fairbanks Morse, like this structure here, mainly held things like smaller generators, motors, scales, and things. So that's what this building is. And this building was originally twice the footprint here on the old layout, and so I tried to break it apart, but I literally ended up having to cut it in half with a Dremel tool, and then patch it back together again. So I managed to do that put new replacement pilasters on, glued it back together again. And I still have the canopy. It was damaged when I had it in storage, so that'll still have to go here. But I needed what I see here with this the building and the dock to get the footprint. Other thing I did here with all the buildings here is I finished detailing weathering the roofs. This was following a technique I saw on the Chicago Crossing Model Railroad YouTube channel. And generally what it is these buildings' roofs were generally all painted black. That technique is mainly taking full strength matte medium, putting it on, brushing it on the roof, and adding sheets of tissue paper, white tissue paper, and layering it down, and letting it dry. And you could add different multiple layers for different effects. And then I also added in here weathering powder for light brown and dark brown to represent and then some of this Bldg environment, green slime kind of stuff to represent some spots where you have potentially evidence of dried standing water and potentially in roof sags in the places. Then I added some black weathering powder on top to represent these are faded original roofs rather than the white roofs of today. Then the last thing here we did here is the Hudson Duncan building. You saw before with just mat board before. We added a N-scale architect brick sheet side here. Some of the many Tichy windows that I have. Some down sports for scuppers. Some roof vents I had. Repurposed from the old East Portland flat here. And they got that building installed. The only thing left here is going to be the painted on sign here. In fact, I'm going to have a video soon here, eventually, on how to make signs for buildings like this. That'll be coming up. And then lastly here, I worked on fitting in the embankment. This was again I said I would cut back, glued the approach back on, reconstructed part of the abutment and part of the abutment wall. We'll still have to feather this in and redo this. And again, we'll probably have it. We'll have another video here looking on some of the scenery techniques that I do in the future here. But see, we did get the bridge cut down to place, so it's sitting where it should be sitting. With that, once that was all done, we did actually lay in the rest of the track, so you can see we have the rest of the spurs we put in. Got the SP&S track in place, and then including creating some of the dummy crossings across the main line here. This piece here was cut. It's metal rails, and I did cut this short so it doesn't touch. Otherwise, we'd potentially get short. So don't want that. I do eventually have some 3D printed guardrail parts. I'll put in here later when we get to more detailing stage to make it look more like a regular crossing. And then here, this first track here was painted, and this was just Rust-Oleum primer, rust colored primer from the sides, and then black from the top, maybe a bit of gray. I'm planning to go in some of the spurs, especially. I'll dry brush some gray and things like that to make weathering and detail things up, and we'll add some more weathering powders as we get closer, especially after the ballast. But those are future steps. And then the last step here we've done here, as I did put in before I painted the track, to get all of the feeders in place for all the tracks. So the next steps here will be to putting wires together underneath, and also dealing with the buildings. A lot of these buildings will have some exterior lights. So we'll have to kind of figure out exactly how those go, and it creates accommodations. Some of these buildings need backs and subfloors and things like that to do that. And again, that may be a subject of another video. Okay, here moving on to the Hague Ford building module. Here's the way into doing that Ford spur. I cut that Ford spur building back, mainly because we accommodate a loading dock in here. I want to actually have some room potentially in here. I haven't figured out exactly the placement of these buildings, but potentially to allow a room for a roadway to kind of one lane roadway to sneak past here. Otherwise, we can get some access to the pole yard and things like that. So I want to create a room with the track going all the way back as reasonably possible. So I want to make some room for a roadway. Also here with the brought the water tank out of storage on top of the Ford building here, and then I actually added some extra details, added some extra mechanical, since this building is no longer a auto factory anymore. Maybe it's more of warehouses, things like that. Now here, moving down the other end of the module, I had originally talked about wanting to having team track, stockyard, and a coal yard, but looking at it here and bringing the stuff out of storage, realized there's just not the room. There's not the room for all three. Since the coal yard was the least used option, I decided to eliminate it, keep the team track in here. The stock pen, the size on the original layout, however, I can see that I'm going to have to probably cut a bay out of here and only make it about 2/3, mainly because there's not enough room for the chute, for the track, and have realistically enough to somebody to back a stock truck in there as well. So I want to create a little bit more room here. Moving to the other part of the module, again, there's been some changes. I originally had the big, the ice plant here, the R.J. Frost, while there's R.J. Frost building. But in reality, Brooklyn did not have an ice plant. It had an ice storage house. So I'm going to build the ice house out of the original Wathers kit. It's supposed to be a PFE prototype. So it's about pretty close to the size that it should be. So that'll give some more room here, because I have to try to make us room. We have to have room for the trucks, for the team track, stockyard, coming out for the propane dealer, not to mention the ice house, because the ice was delivered. It wasn't manufactured here, but it was delivered here. So we got to have room for trucks for there. And then also, obviously, for the trucks coming off the TFC, unloading things in TFC dock. TFC dock won't be this long. This is a 3D kit. I bought it to show, but it will be cut down to fit a little better. Then here, this is just a standing industry here. We'll have some sort of industry building along here to help, whether it be a standalone industry or something related to the shops. And also in front here, this will be a roadway here, and we'll have a crossing here with some flashing lights here, and then we'll have a neighborhood here. We have a number of these, Portland, Cape Cod, and bungalow houses typical for the Portland area. We'll have a little neighborhood sitting here, and that pretty much wraps everything up for this particular update. And we'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.